The belief that labor dictates a harvest is the primary distortion of the modern mind. Most individuals measure their progress by the heaviness of their hours and the volume of their sweat, entirely unaware that a misaligned internal position renders the most frantic effort neutral. It is not the act of rising that alters a destiny, but the gravitational center from which one emerges into the world. When the internal state is one of pursuit, the external world must, by necessity, remain in retreat. Observe the quiet persistence of delay and the rhythmic return of the same obstacles in your life. This is not a lack of opportunity or a failure of intelligence, but a precise, automatic response from a reality that cannot contradict your current internal frequency. To pursue a result is to formally announce its absence to the collective order. The more aggressive the chase, the more effectively you push the objective away. This inverted pursuit is the silent tax paid by those who operate outside the law of invisible coherence. There exists a specific threshold of stillness long before the collective noise of the world begins, where the blueprint of reality is not planned but solidified. This is not a ritual of productivity or a test of willpower, but a recalibration of your mental center of gravity. When the internal position is established in the absence of external friction, the world has no choice but to rearrange its geometry around your presence. Those who ignore this window remain reactive, permanent passengers in reality they claim to want to lead. You may have spent years wondering why the same walls appear under different names, assuming you have lost time or lacked luck. In truth, you have simply inhabited a version of yourself that was structurally incapable of sustaining the prosperity you sought. The friction you feel is the sound of an engine trying to run while the internal gears are locked in a state of incoherence. Reality is a perfect mirror, and no amount of effort can force a mirror to show a reflection that does not first exist in the one standing before it. What follows is not a set of instructions, but a cold demonstration of the mechanical certainty of these laws. 30 days is not a time frame for change, but the duration required for the external world to catch up to a permanent internal shift. To turn away now is to accept the current repetition as your final state, confirming that you are not yet ready to occupy a different space. To remain is to finally stop fighting the shadows and begin adjusting the light that casts them. The tragedy of the modern condition lies in the exhaustive belief that more motion results in more progress. Most individuals spend their entire lives in a state of frantic agitation, assuming that the heaviness of their fatigue is a metric of their proximity to success. They study every tactic, consume every theory, and force their bodies into cycles of grueling labor, yet find that the primary structure of their lives remains stubbornly unchanged. It is a quiet, devastating realization that one can run 1,000 miles and still find themselves standing on the same internal ground, facing the same limitations and encountering the same invisible barriers that have always been there. This is not a failure of will or a lack of intellect, but the inevitable consequence of operating a machine while the primary engine is fundamentally misaligned. When we observe those who appear to struggle perpetually despite their obvious talent and effort, we are witnessing the friction of an internal contradiction. The world sees the outward activity, the phone calls, the spreadsheets, and the late hours, but reality ignores these surface vibrations. Reality does not respond to what you do. It responds to the state from which you do it. If the underlying frequency of your existence is one of hidden panic, perceived lack, or the desperate need to prove worth, every action you take is saturated with that signature. You are essentially building a house on a foundation of shifting sand and wondering why the walls keep cracking despite using the finest materials. The effort itself becomes a form of noise that drowns out the very signals required for a different order of life to emerge. There is a profound, almost surgical coldness to the way the world organizes itself around an individual's internal gravity. Most people believe they are participating in a fair game where effort is rewarded with outcome, but they are playing the wrong game entirely. The external world is merely a delayed echo of a silent, internal command that was issued long before any physical action was taken. If you feel as though you are constantly pushing against a closed door, it is likely because your internal state has already locked it. This is a law of automaticity. The environment cannot provide a result that is not first sustained by the internal position. Until this position is shifted, Every strategy is just a new way to experience the same old disappointment. Consider the nature of the chase that consumes the average life. There's a frantic pursuit of wealth, recognition, and stability, as if these things were wild animals that could be cornered and captured through sheer persistence. Yet, the very act of chasing something confirms its absence and reinforces its distance. To chase is to declare that you do not have. To declare that you do not have is to instruct the universe to keep providing you with the experience of not having. This is the paradox of the inverted pursuit, where the harder one runs after a goal, the more effectively they repel it. The world does not give to the one who wants. It reflects the state of the one who already occupies the space of completion. The stagnation you feel is not a punishment, nor is it a sign that the universe is indifferent to your plight. It is a precise and accurate measurement of your current mental center of gravity. You have been operating under the assumption that if you could just find the right piece of information or the right person to help you, the dam would break. But the dam is not made of external circumstances. It is made of the incoherent signals you send into the field of your life every single day. You are currently getting exactly what your internal state is designed to produce. To expect a different result without a fundamental reorganization of your internal architecture is to argue with the very laws of physics that govern the mind. The significance of the earliest hours of the day has nothing to do with productivity in the traditional sense, and everything to do with the architecture of the silent field. Most people wake up and immediately begin reacting to the demands of their environment, effectively allowing the world to dictate their internal state. By the time the clock reaches mid-morning, they have already surrendered their position to the momentum of their anxieties and the expectations of others. They spend the rest of the day in a defensive posture, trying to manage a reality that they have already allowed to become chaotic. They are not leaders of their lives. They are janitors cleaning up the mess of a day they never actually claimed. When you enter the silence while the rest of the world still sleeps, you are not merely getting a head start on your tasks. You are entering the laboratory where the blueprint of your reality is solidified. In these hours, the collective noise is absent, and the veil between thought and manifestation is at its thinnest. This is where the internal position is established without the interference of external friction. If you can occupy a state of absolute coherence before the sun rises, you set a gravitational center that the rest of the day must revolve around. The world does not have the power to disturb a center that was forged in the absolute stillness of the dawn. However, most individuals use this time, if they use it all, to simply worry earlier. They bring the same exhausted self into the early hours and wonder why the magic eludes them. They are still playing the game of effort. Try to squeeze more work out of a tired mind, rather than using the silence to recalibrate the generator. If the generator is faulty, starting it earlier only produces more smoke. The goal is not to do more, but to become the version of yourself for whom doing is an effortless expression of an already established internal fact. Until the internal shift occurs, the clock is irrelevant. There is an invisible order that organizes success and failure with a mathematical certainty that ignores your desires and your feelings of entitlement. This order recognizes only the weight of your internal conviction and the consistency of your mental position. When there is a gap between what you say you want and what you internally expect, the world always defaults to the expectation. This is why many who work the hardest often have the least. Their labor is a frantic attempt to compensate for an internal expectation of failure. They are trying to outrun their own shadows, unaware that the shadow is cast by the very light they are carried within themselves. The realization that your life is an automatic response to your internal state is initially uncomfortable because it removes the possibility of blame. You can no longer point to the economy, your upbringing, or your lack of connections as the primary cause of your stagnation. These things are merely the scenery that your internal state has selected to justify its current position. When the position changes, the scenery must change to maintain the coherence of the reflection. This is not a matter of belief, but a matter of alignment. The mirror does not argue with the image. It simply reflects what is placed before it. If you look closely at the recurring patterns of your existence, you will hear the sound of locked gears. It is the sound of the mind that is trying to move forward while holding on to a self-image that is anchored in the past. This friction creates a heat that we call stress, but it is actually just the energy of a soul in conflict with its own potential. You have been trying to solve your problems at the level of the problem, using the same logic that created the obstacle to try and dismantle it. This is a structural impossibility. To change the output, you must go to the source code, which exists in the quiet, undisturbed layers of your consciousness. You may feel as though you have lost years to this misalignment, but time is a relative construct that reality uses to give weight to your current convictions. The moment a true internal reorganization occurs, the delay in the physical world begins to collapse. What took decades to build in a state of incoherence can be dismantled and replaced in a fraction of the time once the mental center of gravity is correctly positioned. The sensation of being stuck is simply the experience of a very powerful engine running in neutral. The power is there, the fuel is there, but the connection to the wheels has not been made. The silence that follows these words is not empty. It is the sound of an old architecture beginning to settle into its own collapse. You have lived under the impression that the distance between you and your desires was a matter of miles and hours, when it was always a matter of internal geometry. The frantic pursuit that defined your past was merely a formal confirmation of lack, a broadcast of the world that what you sought was not already yours. You now recognize that the shadow only eludes the one who chases it, while it faithfully follows the one who simply decides to stand in the light. There is a heavy, unspoken cost to ignoring the invisible laws that govern the response of your reality. You have felt the weight of this tax in every delayed result, every recurring obstacle, and every moment where your effort yielded only exhaustion. This was not a sequence of accidents, but a precise enforcement of your internal incoherence. To continue operating under the illusion of struggle is no longer an option, for the friction of that lie has now become visible. You are beginning to realize that you were never a victim of circumstances, but a master of frequency you no longer wish to sustain. Returning to the noise of the world after this encounter will feel different. The familiar chaos will now seem like a foreign language you have forgotten how to speak. The state of reacting, of being a mere passenger to the demands of the day, will generate a new kind of internal heat, a warning that you are betraying a newly recognized center of gravity. This discomfort is the most honest thing you have felt in years. It is the refusal of your true nature to be compressed back into the narrow dimensions of your former limitations, signaling that the door is already closed behind you. The 30 days ahead are not a test of your willpower, but a period of observation while the external world rearranges itself to match your new internal position. The silence of the dawn is where this work is done, far from the influence of those who still believe that labor is the only currency of success. You are reclaiming the first hour not to do more, but to be the one for whom the doing is an effortless expression of an established fact. This is a restoration of the natural order, where the world follows the mind, and the mind is anchored in the absolute certainty of its own presence. For those whose internal recognition has been ignited, the path forward is not a choice, but a requirement of coherence. If these words have articulated the silent tension of your own soul, then the journey toward this new order has already begun. You are invited to align with this frequency, not for information, but for the continued recalibration of your internal field. Committing to this transformation is a final act of leaving the old world behind and occupying the space that has always been waiting for your arrival. The mirror cannot reflect what you do not first embody.